You won't believe what happened on The View. Mel Gibson, the legendary action star and talented director, stunned Whoopi Goldberg on live television. At a moment no one had predicted, the audience erupted in ecstasy. Like each previous episode, it started off that way. The stage lights erupted, the audience roared enthusiastically, and the hosts, Whoopi Goldberg, Joy Behar, and Sanani Hen, flashed their signature smiles. But underlying those smiles was a carefully considered plan. There was no invitation to a friendly discussion for Mel Gibson. They wanted to humiliate him. The show began with the unique voice of Whoopi. "Welcome to The View, Mel Gibson." The most controversial man right now, a talented director and Hollywood star, made a kind remark, but her eyes said otherwise. Mel walked out with total confidence, wearing a sharp black suit, his blue eyes penetrating the room. He sat down, grinning faintly knowingly, and the combat began. The viewpoint of today wasn't a talk program, it was a battlefield now. Before you start, remember to leave a comment stating where you are seeing the story, and to subscribe so you don't miss the latest stories. The atmosphere in the studio was fantastic. The audience pushed forward, whispers rippling under the brilliant lights like an undercurrent. Mel Gibson staring at Whoopi Goldberg, who had shown her hunter's intensity under her polite facade. Every expression and creased face was captured by the cameras as they panned in. Joy Behar smiled slightly, her eyes glimmering with anticipation. Sunny Hostin was ready to strike, pen in hand. The stage was prepared, and the first shot was about to be fired. Goldberg took a step forward and spoke in a dapper but demanding voice. "All right, Mel, let's talk about your support for Trump's tax proposal, a 100% tariff on foreign films. Do you really think it will keep Hollywood afloat, or is it just a way to stifle creativity everywhere?" The question hit like a hammer. Several people nodded in agreement as the room buzzed in response to her questionable tone. Ibson didn't flinch. He sat comfortably, his hands resting lightly on the chair, yet his eyes were blazing with conviction. The objective is to preserve American jobs. Whoopi, Hollywood employs more than 2 million workers, including lighting crews, editors, and set designers. When production is shifted to countries with lower labor, those jobs are lost. Just last year, we lost 30,000 union jobs to foreign filmmakers. The equal playing field is achieved by tariffs. With each line skillfully composed, his serene voice cut through the constrained studio air. A few audience members muttered to one another, exchanging shocked glances. Goldberg arched an eyebrow, refusing to back down. "You're a filmmaker though, Mel. You know that collaboration, not barriers, is what makes art flourish. Tariffs will limit audience options, hurt independent producers, and raise costs. You say that's great for creativity." Her tone had a hint of derision, as if Gibson's argument had been made in a different era. Gibson flashed his eyes and grinned a little. Collaborating does not mean being taken advantage of. Independent producers are suffering as a result of big studios flooding the market with low-budget foreign films. Tariffs force studios to invest in American talent. Last year, 70% of the money spent by big studios went overseas. If we keep that money in the US, we can create thousands of new jobs on sound stages and post-production. He paused, surveyed the crowd, and urged them to reflect. There was intermittent applauding and a few nods from the audience. Behar intervened in a caustic manner. "You want to turn Hollywood into a museum, Mel? Our society is global in scope." Gibson pivoted, his gaze still focused on her. "Globalization does not come at the expense of American workers. I filmed in Australia, Mexico, and Ireland, Joy. I understand that international collaboration is necessary, but when studios put profits ahead of people, we have to draw a line. Tariffs are that line." Bihar's eyes shot away, momentarily taken aback by his sharp answer. Goldberg understood the occasion, and her voice grew sharper. What about the audience, though, Mel? They are searching for quality movies. They don't care where they are filmed. Tariffs will affect regular viewers by making tickets more expensive. Do you believe that will bring them joy? The question stirred tremendous emotions in the audience, and they mumbled as they waited for his response. Gibson kept his gaze fixed on Goldberg and tilted his head. The first step in giving consumers the top-notch movies they deserve is to fairly compensate filmmakers. If ticket prices are increased by a few cents to save thousands of jobs, I think people would understand. Tariffs also don't make tickets more expensive. They force movie studios to cut back on their enormous revenues. The CEOs of the top 3 studios earned over $200 million last year, while set crews barely survived on temporary contracts. In reality, who is hurting the audience? Whoopi. Following his straight, striking response, the audience exploded in further enthusiastic applause. Hostin, who had remained silent until now, spoke out in a sharp, chilly voice. Mel, you talk about jobs, but tariffs might start a trade war. Retaliation from other countries will cause Hollywood to lose its export markets. Have you considered that? Her question was like an arrow aimed at a tactical vulnerability. Gibson winked, acknowledging that the question was abrasive. I have, Sonny. But Hollywood is hardly a helpless victim. We are the leading exporters of culture in the world. American films are sold abroad for $15 billion annually. Other countries could be offended, but they need our movies more than we need theirs. Tariffs are a negotiating tool, not an impediment to isolation. Additionally, if we invest in domestic production, Hollywood will become stronger rather than weaker. In response to his direct and logical assertion, the host pursed her lips, unable to find an instantaneous gap. The audience erupted in more enthusiastic applause, and several people sprang to their feet, their eyes bright. Goldberg saw that things were shifting and tried to regain control. Mel, you seem convincing, but this is Trump's strategy. His lack of interest in art is also well recognized. You're just doing what he says, aren't you? The question was a personal attack meant to make Gibson defensive. Gibson chuckled quietly, not out of anger, but with the confidence of someone who had seen the move coming. I'm not a bigoted Aaron fan. As a filmmaker, I support my industry. If Trump's initiatives protect American workers, I support them. Not for him, but for the millions who depend on Hollywood. Call it anything you want. The fact is known to this audience. He pulled the listener into the narrative with a soft motion. The studio shook with applause as the crowd stood and clapped like thunder. Goldberg pursed her lips, and her eyes fluttered anxiously. Bihar and host exchanged glances as they saw that Gibson was taking the initiative and not just holding his ground. Said backstage by a producer into an earpiece, "Cut the shot. He is assuming a central role." But the video went on to show Gibson turning an attack into a vicious retaliation. The atmosphere in the studio remained explosive, despite the dwindling applause following the tariff argument. Mel Gibson sat up straight, his eyes calm but alert, like a fighter who had survived the first round and was ready for the next. Whoopi Goldberg maintained her composure, but her eyes glistened with determination to regain control as she gripped the table a bit more tightly. Goldberg's voice softened and her tone got sad as she took a big breath. Mel, let's be honest. You discuss jobs a lot. You are among the most vocal supporters of Trump, who many say is dividing America. Is it an honor for you to back him? The audience silently gasped as they waited for Gibson's response to the question about his political affiliation. Gibson tilted his head, his gaze fixed, yet a little smile spread over his face as if he had anticipated this move. I support anyone who puts Americans first. Whoopi? Trump is not perfect, but think about the results. The U.S. unemployment rate was at its lowest point in half a century, 3.5%, before the outbreak. Black workers, women, and minorities had more stable jobs than previously. For this reason, I back his policies instead of the man. His response carried the weight of someone who has given it considerable thought, even though it was succinct and fact-based. The audience mumbled, some nodding, as they were astounded by the intricacy. Refusing to let Gibson take the lead, Goldberg pushed ahead and talked sharper. Politics, however, is more than numbers, Mel. Polarization has been made worse by Trump, his comments, and immigration strategy. Do you realize how that is hurting the country, or are you only focused on your own financial situation? The personal question was meant to put Gibson in a tight spot, but several audience members cheered it. Gibson remained calm, looking around the room and tapping the table gently with his fingertips before turning back to Goldberg. Both sides have the potential to sow discord. Whoopi. I've been all around the United States, from little towns in Ohio to big cities like Los Angeles. The last thing anyone wants to argue about is speeches. They want a job, stability, and a future for their kids. If Trump does it, I'll support him. I have, however, criticized him when called for, including in regards to his treatment of the media. Gibson's query was like a bomb, evoking simultaneous laughter and applause from the crowd. He paused and dropped his voice, asking, "I'm not blind. How about you? Have you ever wondered whether our show, which only attracts like-minded persons, exacerbates division?" Goldberg froze, her lips pursed, clearly taken aback by the counterattack. Ahar, as quick as a whip, jumped in to save the day. "Oh, Mel, don't pretend to be neutral. You're Trump's guy, and everyone knows what he stands for. Conservative, outdated. You think the world is going back to your era?" Her eyes were a little worried, but her tone was rife with sarcasm. "I'm not trying to go back in time. I want an America where people are heard, not dictated to by the media or shows like this. I've been making films for over 40 years, and I've learned one thing. Human stories, not politics, are what connect us." Gibson laughed, a quick but assured laugh. "Mel, you talk about listening to the people, but Trump's often criticized for ignoring minority communities. Trump, Biden, or anyone else, I only care about policies that help people live better." The audience clapped again, louder this time, like a wave smashing through the studio. Hostin, sensing the tide turning, spoke up with a calm but piercing voice. "I do have a responsibility, Sonny, and I've acted on it. As someone with influence, don't you think you have a responsibility to speak out when he goes off course?" Her question, which was clever and aimed at Gibson's personal ethics, silenced the audience as they waited. Gibson nodded, his eyes showing respect for the question. His response was so sincere and logical that the host furrowed her brow, unable to find an immediate flaw. "I've met Trump and called him out when I disagreed, such as on how he handled some social issues, but I also see him doing good, investing in poor areas, and increasing job opportunities for minority communities. I'm not here to defend every decision he makes. I'm here to say we need to look at actions, not just words." "Mel, you talk a good game, but you can't deny Trump has hurt many people," Goldberg said, trying to take control of the crowd after noticing a shift. The audience erupted, applause thundering, some cheering, obviously swayed by Gibson's candor. A woman in the middle row raised her hand in support, her eyes shining. "You're picking a side by standing with him," she said, attempting to box Gibson in with an accusing question. "Do you not see the risk in that?" Gibson added, "I'm not taking sides, Whoopi," while maintaining an unrelenting focus on Goldberg. "Every politician makes errors, but we cannot let the media or programs like this to determine who is right or wrong. That's why I'm choosing the truth." The audience is smarter than that. They want the truth, not a staged drama. He pointed lightly at the audience, his voice low but powerful, as if drawing them into his fight. Whoopi Goldberg inhaled deeply, her eyes flashing with intensity as if she'd found her sharpest dagger. Joy Behar leaned in, her gaze sly. Sanani Hust adjusted her glasses, her fingers skimming her notes, ready to strike. You talk about truth, Mel, but let's confront another reality. Your prior contentious remarks, accusations of racism, and anti-Semitism. How can the audience believe that someone who made such a mistake would stand here and defend American culture? With a low, slow, and razor-sharp voice, Goldberg raised her chin and stated. The audience gasped softly, all eyes on Gibson, waiting to see if he would crumble or stand firm. Whoopi, I don't avoid my history. Gibson responded, bending slightly, his eyes reflecting as if considering every word. I've made mistakes, said wrong things, had moments I'm not proud of, but I've spent decades making amends, learning, and proving through actions that I'm not the man of those mistakes. Gibson then turned to Goldberg. That's who I am today. He paused, his gaze sweeping the audience, inviting them to look deeper. I made films like Hacksaw Ridge, telling the story of a soldier who rejected violence and the passion of the Christ, honoring the faith of millions. The audience fell silent, with some nodding slightly, their eyes displaying empathy. Goldberg, not letting Gibson win their sympathy, fired back. Words are easy, Mel, but what you say hurts people, she added. Communities of color and Jews. You believe that a few movies will be sufficient to obliterate history? Her voice was cold and accusing, causing the audience to murmur and clap in agreement. Gibson smiled slightly, not smugly, but with the composure of someone who had survived adversity. I'm not trying to erase my past, Whoopi. Why don't I get a chance to make things right? He said. His question was like an arrow striking at Goldberg's contradiction, making her pause and her eyes waver. I confront it. I've spoken with local officials, issued a public apology, and tried to mend fences. But let's speak about accountability. You've made provocative claims to protect others, such as when you discussed free speech on this same show. The audience isn't that easily duped. Mel, don't sidestep the problem. You said things that were unacceptable. Now you want us to applaud you because you've changed. As the audience erupted in cheers, some of them with their eyes blazing, Behar, sensing that the tide was turning, interrupted with a mocking tone. She crossed her arms, her gaze attempting to pierce Gibson. I'm not asking for applause, Joy, Gibson remarked, turning to Behar with calm eyes. I'm requesting that my deeds, not my previous transgressions, be used to judge me. Throughout my 40 years in this field, I have worked with individuals of all colors and beliefs, giving thousands of people chances. If you're interested, look into the good I've done as well, such as supporting film projects for up-and-coming black filmmakers in Atlanta. Or are you content to keep me in the villain role so that I can be easily attacked? The applause broke up again, but Behar stayed mute, her eyes moving away. Louder, as if a tsunami were destroying the studio. A woman in the front row jumped up and raised her hand in support, her eyes shining as if Gibson had said it herself. Poston saved the day by playing the sensible voice. I appreciate your efforts, Mel, but you must be consistent for the viewers. How can people recognize that you've changed and not just been pretending to keep your reputation intact? She skillfully targeted Gibson's credibility with her inquiry, which hushed the audience while they waited. Gibson nodded, his eyes gleaming with sincerity. Consistency isn't perfection, Sonny. It's overcoming every obstacle, behaving honorably, and never stopping learning. I'm not acting. I live by my beliefs. If you want the audience to know who I am, look at my work, the people I've helped, and the stories I tell in my films. They will see a man who takes responsibility for his mistakes and works to get better. The host bowed her head slightly, unable to see anything wrong with his statement, which amounted to a promise. The audience surged, with some standing with glowing eyes and others cheering. Goldberg saw that the audience was rooting for Gibson and tried to regain control. Even if you talk about actions, Mel, your past nevertheless has a lasting impact. You think the audience will forget if you tell them a few touching stories. Her voice was softer than before, as if she were losing ground, yet she still sounded accusatory. Gibson stared at Goldberg without blinking. I'm not asking the audience to forget, Whoopi. I want them to see me for my imperfections, my work, and my creations. If you decide to judge me solely on my past, you are depriving everyone of the chance to develop. Moreover, I have no doubt that this audience is smart enough to see past dramatic headlines. The studio rocked with yells as the audience stood, applause crashing like waves. A producer backstage shook their head and muttered over an earpiece. He's running the whole show. Goldberg's eyes were filled with worry as she tightened her hands. Sitting in quiet, Bihar and the host exchanged nervous glances. When Gibson's calm yet commanding presence turned a personal attack into a powerful reply, the viewpoint was left reeling. Gibson calmly made a little adjustment to his collar, his eyes burning like an insatiable inferno. Goldberg's voice was low and piercing. Mel, you talk about change, but let's look at it from a different angle. You support Trump, who many believe threatens free speech with his attacks on the media and threats to sue them. As a filmmaker, isn't that risky? The question centered on Gibson's ethics, which made the audience grumble quietly as they watched him and waited to see if he would stand or fall. Gibson inclined his head slightly and stared at Goldberg, a flickering spark, as if he had been waiting for this. Whoopi, free speech is what America is all about. I've lived long enough to see its struggles in Hollywood and in politics. To be clear, however, the freedom to express oneself without fear of penalties is not a component of free speech. It's the liberty to debate, and defend your convictions. I don't agree with everything Trump does, but he is a bigger threat. The media provides some information selectively in order to achieve its goals. He spoke in a low voice, leaving his words etched in the air, and the audience became silent as they listened to every word he said. Goldberg furrowed her forehead and spoke tougher. Media coverage that is selective. Mel, are you talking about us? The perspective serves as a platform for debate and research. Do you lack the ability to take on challenges? The hostile question was meant to put Gibson on the defensive, but several audience members cheered it. Gibson's smile was subtle yet sharp, like a samurai about to deliver a last blow. I'm game for a challenge, Whoopi. I don't see much debate here, though. It is intended to denigrate everyone who opposes you. I've been a long-time viewer of this show, and I know that conservative guests are rarely treated respectfully. You refer to that as free speech. He paused, his sweeping gaze drawing the audience into the discussion. All sides of the story, not just the one that has already been changed, should be told to this audience, in my opinion. The audience erupted in cheers, and a few stood with their eyes burning. Bihar couldn't help but interject in a mocking tone. Mel, are you now playing the victim? Here, you are welcome, provided you a chance to speak. If the heat is too much for you, stay out of the kitchen. She crossed her arms and attempted to face Gibson. Gibson's eyes never wavered as he gazed straight ahead. Joy, I don't mind the heat. I've made films in the midst of controversy, drawn criticism from all sides, and survived. However, bringing someone on just to make fun of them is not a kind of free expression. I can demonstrate it with a modest present. A quick montage started playing on a large studio screen as he signaled to his staff. Excerpts from earlier shows that demonstrate the viewpoint demeaning conservative guests by making fun of them and interrupting them. The audience was stunned and whispered to one other. A woman in the back seat covered her lips, her eyes wide with wonder. The tape ended with Goldberg's question from a previous program. What good is free speech if we can't laugh at wrong opinions? Gibson looked straight at her, his voice quiet yet powerful. Whoopi, if people are being made fun of using their right to free speech, this show isn't a place for debate. It's a stage for performances. The audience deserves better. The studio exploded. Cheers and applause break like waves. Everyone stood. Some people are shouting Gibson's name. A man in the front row raised his fist, his eyes blazing. Goldberg seemed agitated for the first time, her hands clasped and her gaze flinching. Hostin's voice, calm yet urgent, tried to save the day. Mel, you're attacking us, but free speech includes the right to criticize. Could you not accept that? Her question was clever, but it lacked conviction in front of a crowd that was leaning against Gibson. Gibson nodded, his gaze polite, but his words were unrelenting. I'm willing to take criticism, Sonny. Criticism must, however, be reasonable and not a practiced move intended to undermine an opponent. Having worked as a filmmaker for a while, I know that a great story requires the input of everyone, not just the filmmakers. The viewpoint may create a great story if you dared to let the viewers choose instead of telling them. His comment was like a call to action, and Hostin, unable to see any flaw, bowed her head slightly in response. With cheers echoing and the stage lights seeming to pulse with the crowd's heartbeat, the audience erupted once again. Goldberg thought the battle was slipping away and tried to regain control. Despite your assertions of objectivity, Mel, you stand here endorsing a man who has called the media the enemy. Don't you see the contradiction? Her voice trailed off a bit, as if she knew this was her last opportunity. Gibson was looking straight into Goldberg's eyes and spoke in a quiet but commanding manner. I'm not endorsing anyone's claims, Whoopi. I'm advocating for the freedoms of speech, discussion, and hearing. If this show or the media want to be the defenders of truth, then open the gate and let all opinions enter. The audience does not require a guide. The truth must be known to them. And I'm hoping they're smart enough to find it. He motioned to the gathering, his voice resonating like a proclamation. The studio seemed like it had just been hit by an earthquake, the air still trembling from the intense altercation about free speech. Their eyes glistened as the ovation subsided and the audience stood, but the echo was still audible throughout the stage. Mel Gibson sat up straight, his eyes calm but shining with a hint of pride, like a warrior who has just vanquished his final foe. Whoopi Goldberg's hands were limp on the table as he stared blankly, as if trying to process what had just happened. With her eyes gone and her silver hair disheveled, Joy Behar bit her lip. Sonani Hostin lowered her head as though she had just lost the most significant case of her career, her hand lying on crumpled papers. In a desperate attempt to regain control, Goldberg cleared her throat and attempted an awkward grin. Thank you, Mel, for an interesting conversation. Audience, what do you think of what you just heard? Her voice was not as charming as it normally was. The audience exploded in applause for Gibson rather than for her. A woman in the front row sprang up, yelling and raising her hand as if Gibson had said it straight from her heart. She had burning eyes. As the applause rose and turned into an overwhelming wave, Goldberg bowed her head, and her eyes showed desperation. Gibson stood staring attentively around the audience while adjusting his outfit. Thank you for listening, he murmured in a quiet, nice voice, like a man who has finished a duty. I'm not here to argue, but to remind everyone that they have the right to voice their opinions and be heard. You certainly know how to win them over, Mel. But don't we have more to say? She tried a smile, but her eyes showed despair. His remarks, which were like a declaration, reignited the audience's excitement, with some shouting, "Mel! Mel!" as if he were their hero. Bihar, unable to stand it any longer, interrupted in a mocking way. With his sharp eyes sparkling, Gibson simply nodded. Happy. "I think the audience has said plenty," he added in a kind yet sharp voice that made the audience laugh out and burst into cheers once again. Houston adopted the rational voice in an attempt to salvage the day. "Mel, we respect your point of view, but we can always talk about it. We're hoping you'll return to continue our conversation." Her words was kind, but her eyes were strained, as if she knew the program had been hit fatally. Gibson smiled, his eyes real. "If you're ready for a serious argument, Sonny, I'll be back. The next time, follow the truth." His response amounted to an invitation, and the audience cheered and cheered. Gibson walked steadily out of his chair and surveyed the studio one last time. He could still clearly recall the days Hollywood abandoned him, the long hours of meditation, and the struggle to reclaim himself. He had defended people who were engulfed by the media today, in addition to his own honor. He left the stage to waves of applause from the audience, which continued until his figure disappeared behind the curtain. The moment that rocked the studio was when a guy in the back row exclaimed, "Thank you, Mel." Backstage, chaos reigned. The producer, flushed, yelled into a headset. As the displays in the control room dimmed, social media was inundated with online comments, ranging from Whoopi's out of her league to Mel Gibson destroying the vista. Staff members exchanged worried glances, realizing that this incident would be a media frenzy. "Who released that video? We're finished," another muttered and shook their head. "We underestimated him," Bihar said in a tremulous murmur to Houston, who nodded, her hands folding her crumpled notes as though she were conceding defeat, her eyes displaying despair. Goldberg seemed to be processing the loss as she sat quietly on stage with her eyes closed, thinking back to the times when she could control any discussion and the perspective was unassailable. The bustle continued even after the audience began to leave the studio, with a group of young women talking animatedly at the exit. "In my experience, Whoopi has never been silenced so effectively." "Eyes shining," one said. "Gibson is right. We must listen to both points of view." Another nodded and shared the video she had just watched on her phone. "He didn't just win," an older man in a studio corner said, with a proud smile to his friend, changing my opinion of the media. When the studio lights went out, the storm from Mel Gibson's fight was still there, sprang forth, and spread like wildfire across a dry landscape. Though the atmosphere inside ABC's headquarters was chaotic, like a ship sinking in a stormy sea, the crowd left the studio with phones in hand and fingers swiping to share what they had witnessed. Mel Gibson entered the streets of New York, the sun shining on his cheeks and his eyes sparkling with the calm of a man who has completed his task. Just minutes after the show ended, social media went crazy, with millions of posts expressing emotion. One account shared, "Mel Gibson just turned the View to ashes, who still calls him washed up." Another account shared a video of Gibson's final blow, along with the montage attacking the View. Another account shared, "Whoopi thought she'd take down Gibson, but he got the whole studio on its feet." Social media platforms were enmeshed in the confusion, and analysis videos uploaded by reaction channels with titles like "Gibson destroys the View in 5 minutes" garnered millions of views in a matter of hours. These videos featured Goldberg or Gibson with the caption, "Truth won, the View 0, and showed them looking upset after losing at home. Many others commented, "I never liked Gibson, but now I'm a fan." The View also just hit itself in the foot when a young TikToker with a clever sense of style recreated the scene when Gibson broadcast the tape, adding dramatic sound effects that had viewers in stitches. Some users uncovered past episodes of The View to bolster Gibson's claim, pointing out instances where the show attacked conservative guests. The media immediately jumped in. The title of a Reuters article was Mel Gibson versus The View, a historic defeat for the chat program. Variety said, Gibson didn't just win the debate, he exposed The View's bias, stripping away its shine. Of course, Fox News praised Gibson, saying, Gibson teaches The View a lesson in free speech. Even neutral outlets like The Washington Post agreed that Gibson's confrontation is a turning point that forces the media to reevaluate how it handles divergent viewpoints. The boardroom at ABC became a battleground, with executives' faces strained and heatedly debated. Typically self-assured, Goldberg stayed in her room and refused to answer questions from the media. According to a close source, she was wondering how the show handled Gibson, but she also felt deceived by the crowd. Panic was revealed in an internal document that was leaked to Deadline. This is the biggest disaster to hit The View in 10 years. Companies that advertised everything from food to cosmetics began to cancel contracts out of concern for their reputations. The audience is turning on The View, a marketing director told Variety, adding, "We can't take the risk." The show's budget was severely damaged when it lost 3 major sponsors in a single day. Even though Austin, who is normally quiet, remained silent, friends told Page 6 that she regretted not being more prepared for Gibson. The following day, Gibson appeared at an event in Los Angeles to promote his new picture, but The View was obscured by the chaos. Bihar, who is always honest, tweeted a brief message. "We simply carried out our duties. People must relax." Thousands of comments labeling her a disgruntled loser immediately flooded the site. The crowd cheered him on like a hero, and a supporter held up a banner that said, "Mel, thank you for speaking for us." Gibson smiled, refusing to openly discuss the scenery, but his eyes spoke for him. He knew he had won. "I didn't come to destroy anyone," he said in a brief Variety interview, adding that he came to serve as a reminder that standing up for what's right is always worthwhile. Millions of people shared the comment, solidifying Gibson's reputation as a strongman. The debate raged on social media, and within hours, tens of thousands of people joined the Mel Gibson Truth Defender page, which was created by Gibson's supporters. Posts that analyzed Gibson's views on everything from free speech to tariffs went viral. It wasn't just The View that Gibson defeated. He made us question the media. As the day progressed, the impact of the incident became clear. Some View supporters, on the other hand, tried to claim that Gibson had just played the victim, but their arguments were overwhelmed by the overwhelming outpouring of support for him. The emotion was captured in a single post. "I love The View, but they got it wrong this time," one ardent viewer wrote on Instagram. "Gibson is correct. We require both viewpoints." Media observers said that The View would have to alter its formula or risk losing viewers in the long run. Gibson, meanwhile, continued on his way with the poise of someone accustomed to storms, and his most recent film garnered more attention than before. The View studio was now silent, its lights low like an abandoned stadium after a deadly battle, while the press and social media were ablaze with interpretations. Mel Gibson walked in the California sunshine back in Los Angeles, but the media storm caused by the View showdown eventually passed, but its reverberations echoed far and wide like circles on a still lake. But he wasn't the only one who left a legacy from that day. The millions of viewers who began to see the media differently owned it. The future of The View at ABC was uncertain, and executives discussed how to save the show in protracted high-level meetings. His eyes were full of the calm of someone who had overcome his greatest challenge. According to an internal report Variety received, the 15% drop in viewing in the week following the show worried the remaining advertisers. The editorial staff was forced to take media ethics training courses that stressed tolerance for differing opinions. And while many fans expressed their sorrow on Instagram, some loyal viewers continued to show support. Once a talk show icon in America, the program was at a turning point: alter or disappear into obscurity. In the days that followed, Whoopi Goldberg retreated into quiet. According to a close acquaintance, she spent hours upon hours reading through social media comments and reflecting to determine why the audience left. "I used to find truth in The View, but now I know that their only objective is to win." She began to consider inviting more diverse guests, but she didn't publicly admit defeat. Joy Behar, who is known for her outspokenness, continued to defend the show on Twitter, but her tone changed to one that prioritized discussion over dispute. In a brief interview with CNN, Sunani Hostin stated, "We've learned that the audience wants fairness, and we have to listen." Despite their slow pace, these changes showed that Gibson accomplished more than just winning a fight. Because of him, The View had to face itself. Meanwhile, Gibson moved with unexpected poise, and his new film, which was promoted on The View, became a huge attraction and saw a sharp increase in box office sales as people flocked to see a man who dared to speak up and enjoy the film. The Vista was a striking example of his stories that question the existing quo. Gibson, who did not view the fight as a personal triumph, came to represent those who felt overpowered by the media, from small-town laborers to independent Hollywood artists, according to a review in The Hollywood Reporter. In a Deadline interview, Gibson's close friend disclosed Mel didn't want to ruin The View. He was aware that Day on The View was more than just a simple altercation. It served as a reminder that truth is always worth protecting, no matter how difficult it may be. He was thinking back on his years of criticism and isolation, as well as his search for meaning in his career, as he stood on his balcony in Malibu, looking out over the Pacific. I think he was effective in improving their performance. The story of Gibson and The View didn't stop with a single episode. It became into a cultural lesson that was taught at media schools and online forums. Journalists began to write about the Gibson effect, describing how one person could intelligently and honestly challenge a media establishment. Gibson taught us that audiences aren't passive. If given the opportunity, they can influence the story. The New York Times quoted an NYU lecturer as saying, "Gibson, on a Hollywood stage, greeted by applauding audiences, was a stark contrast to the muted lights as twilight descended over the now empty studio. One side was made up of the remnants of a failing empire. In the hearts of the audience, Gibson remained the man who dared to speak up for everyone who believes in the power of their voice, not just for himself." In today's American culture, political divisiveness, media prejudice, and free speech conflicts divide communities, and the story of Mel Gibson's confrontation on The View clearly captures these tensions. The other was a blaze of determination. Gibson left behind more than just triumph. It was an appeal for more equitable media and a society free from scripted distortions of the truth. With his convincing arguments on film tariffs, political positions, acknowledging a contentious background, and, most importantly, his free speech counterattack via the footage revealing the viewpoint, Gibson attacked a powerful media system. This story serves as a sharp lens in the modern world, where social media platforms are overflowing with opposing viewpoints, and the media is criticized for influencing public opinion. The audience's outcry, which ranged from applause in the studio to the #1 movie, demonstrated Americans' desire for justice and openness. The ABC scandal, in which sponsors withdrew ethics training courses, was a reflection of the growing calls for media responsibility. In a culture shattered by bias and fake news, Gibson's journey from owning up to his mistakes to becoming a symbol of determination is evidence of the power of truth. More importantly, Gibson encouraged the audience to avoid letting emotions lead them in their disputes, and instead seek the truth by using facts and respect. This is America's real-life lesson. Take a cue from Gibson when dealing with unfairness or criticism from co-workers, the media, or the general public. Make sure you are ready. Face reality and use hardship to your advantage. In the same way that he accepted his history and demonstrated transformation by action, you may sincerely restore trust, both. To make sure you don't miss any more amazing stories like Mel Gibson's showdown with The View, click subscribe. We value your time and hope to see you in the next movie as we look at more groundbreaking media moments. Use your voice, like the crowd that backed Gibson, to build bridges rather than walls in a country that values free expression.